In the fall season, I like to do a lot of camping as the temperatures become more moderate. This season, I decided to take a trip to the Thomas Mountain Range in Utah to get away from all of the noise of the city and try my luck at some amateur gem collecting. I had heard this particular range had a lot of different minerals and semi-precious gemstones, including topaz, which is my birthstone. I took the network of dirt roads to get as close as I could to the base of the mountain before the possibility of high centering my truck started to make me uneasy. These roads were bad. They were full of rocks, and the rocks just kept getting bigger the further I drove in. Once I parked and got all of my gear, I started up a wash, headed up the mountain. I felt truly alone out here. The silence out here was something truly special. I spotted a few vehicles coming in, more towards the main highway, but where I drove to was very desolate. My plan was to scale the mountain and set up camp about halfway up so I could get an early start hunting for some topaz. After getting my tent set up and eating some dinner, I decided to take a few swigs of some whiskey I brought to help me sleep. I quickly realized I didn't have any self-service up here, so I would have to call my wife the next day to check in. She already knew the service was very choppy, so I wasn't going to worry about it. I sat by the fire I made, enjoying the cool night air and the silence. The whiskey was going down easier now and started to take effect. I decided I'd better cut myself off and get some sleep if I wanted to have a productive day tomorrow. I got into my sleeping bag and felt myself quickly falling asleep. This is where things started to get really strange. Shortly after falling asleep, I started to have some very lucid style dreams, which I almost never have. Half the time I can't even remember my dreams. I dreamed I was being taken down by force, down a long steep corridor deep within the mountain. I could feel something holding both of my arms as I was being led further and further down into the mountain. I couldn't see what it was that had a hold of me. It was like I had tunnel vision. When I tried to turn my head, I felt sharp pains ripple through my body. Somehow I knew that I was in the mountain, or somewhere close by from where I was camping. The panic was really starting to set in now. I began trying to scream, only to realize nothing was coming out. I started to struggle as hard as I could, despite the pain I was feeling throughout my body, when suddenly I shot up inside of my tent, completely soaked in sweat. My heart was racing a million miles a minute, or so it seemed. I just sat there, trying to calm down for what felt like a very long time. Okay, I thought to myself, I have never had such a vivid nightmare like this. I kept telling myself it was just a dream. Try not to freak out too much. We've all had them, right? Maybe it was the whiskey combined with the higher altitude. I wasn't used to it. I started to rest more easily and got out of the tent to take a leak. The sky seemed a lot clearer than it did before I went to bed. It was a lot chillier than before, too. I stoked the fire some and tried to warm up before getting back into my sleeping bag. I took a swig of whiskey to help me calm down. After a few minutes or so, I was back fast asleep. Almost immediately, I was back being led down the corridor, only this time at a much faster rate of urgency. I struggled once again, this time knowing I was dreaming. The further I seemed to go down this corridor, I started to hear a very loud thump, like a drum beat, repeatedly, over and over again, getting louder and louder as I was being led down the mountain. That's when I woke up again in my tent, completely drenched in sweat again. This time I felt the actual pain I had felt before shoot down my back. This alarmed me to no end. I laid there shivering from the cold and the sweat, wide awake and scared to death, when I started to hear it, a very distinct thump, repeatedly, the same rhythm as in my dream, only much more faint, and this time I was wide awake. I got up in a mad dash, collapsed my tent, grabbed all of my stuff I could see, and dumped it on my tent and rolled it into a big wad. I quickly put on my shoes and frantically made my way down the wash to my truck. I threw my stuff in the back. It was now about 3 a.m. I paused briefly for a second to see if I could hear anything. I couldn't, but I was still very afraid. I got in and drove off in four-wheel drive and made my way to the highway relatively fast. I finally got a signal and called my wife, explaining what had happened to me, hoping she wouldn't think I was crazy. She believed me and suggested we should probably never go there again. I agreed with her wholeheartedly.